Hi, so we need to mount the motor and the propeller and all of that stuff to the back of the submarine. So what I'm going to do is show you exactly how I'm going to do it. It'll be the same as I did for the Nautilus. It's a little bit idiosyncratic, but the process enables a scratch builder to get something to get lined up very nicely. Now this is the motor that we're going to use, and as someone on the net suggested, the best way of connecting this motor isn't forwards, it's actually backwards because it bolts to the back and it's an outrunner. We'll do that. But let me explain first of all how this is all going to work. There's my boat, and there's the end, and I want to run my prop through here, and I want the motor to be sitting in here. So the question is, what's the best way of doing that? I'm in the middle of building the propeller. The propeller will have a 4mm thread internal. I'm going to use 5mm stainless steel shaft. But the first thing I'm going to do is to make myself two square pieces of brass. They're going to be square so that I can fit them in the lathe. I'm going to bolt them together with some 3mm bolts in the corners. I'm going to put that in the lathe and put a 3mm hole right in the middle that goes through both of them. That's going to be my connecting point. Second stage, I've actually gone ahead and written all this down so I can remember it, is I'm going to make the end cap, obviously. In the middle of the end cap there's going to be probably a 3mm hole just to start with, and I use that to line it up all the time when I put it on the lathe. I'm then going to make a couple of brass connectors that are probably going to get, that'll be the center part, a couple of brass connectors that are going to brackets that I can glue into the side of the boat with a couple of bolts here so that I can get that lined up. So the next step will be to take the piece of brass that's the internal piece of brass that's going to fit the motor, and take that with its little hole in here and very carefully then drill the center holes, drill the attachment holes for the brushless motor all around that so that it all lines up very neatly to that. So I'm going to work pretty hard on that. And then the other piece of brass, which is the one toward the stern, I'm just going to make big enough, I'll make holes in there big enough to, they're not that big, but just big enough so that I can recess the heads of those little bolts when they go in. It'll be like this, two bits of brass. Here's the motor on this side with the brass heads of the bolts, and I'm just going to clear some slots in there so they can go in. That's step one to get the motor mounted. Step two is I'm going to make the shaft and the seal holder, if you like. Now this is going to be a piece of brass that's going to be about that size. It's probably going to be about 15, probably around about 15mm thick, because I've got that size and it works nicely. I'm going to put a little reduction collar on that end. Just, it can be any size because I'm going to turn to it, as you'll see in a minute. Then I'm going to bore that out quite significantly and just leave in the end, and probably this will be about 10, this will be about 30, a 5.5mm hole in the end. So all I'm going to do, that will then be finished. Then we turn this up on its end. That's the 5.5mm hole, and I'm going to drill 2 holes for 3mm bolts to go in there and tap them in. Once I've done that, I'm going to then put this in the lathe. There's the 5mm hole, the 2 tapped holes in there, and I'm going to part it off about there to start with. And now I've got an end cap that I'll open those holes out a bit, an end cap that I can screw onto there that's going to fit perfectly. And then I'm just going to bore out a little section in here so that I can fit an O-ring, which fits on the shaft. So you put the O-ring in there, you bolt your piece up to there, and that now becomes the seal. It's really easy, it works really well. Now at this end, I've got that little shoulder. So I'm going to take my square piece of brass for the internal, I'm going to bore that out to fit that perfectly and silver solder it on. So you can see what we've got now. We've got the motor's going to fit onto there. It's going to be nicely centered. It's all going to go through there. So that's that part done. So the next thing is the end of the boat, where the boat comes down like this. I'm going to make a little brass bush that's going to fit in here. That's probably going to be around about 15. I'm going to knock through here a hole that's about 8. And then I'm going to make my plastic bush that's going to go in here. And that obviously is going to be 5mm to fit per shaft, and it will just neatly click into there. So that's going to be the bush that's going to hold the end of the whole thing. Now, I'm going to drill the end cap out so that it's going to take my stuffing box, if you like. And so what I'm going to do then is I'll draw back the boat here. What have we got so far? We've got this in the back. I'm going to put just put a piece of 5mm rod through there before I've done anything. I haven't made it into a prop shaft per se. I'm going to thread onto it my nice stuffing box that I've made, like that. Then I'm going to enter that into the end cap, because I've drilled a hole. I'm going to make sure this is all turning really nicely, and then, and that's actually, yeah, and then I'm going to fix this in place, leave it for a day or so, and that's going to be then perfectly lined up so that I can go and now fit the motor. So the next thing that we have to do is take this piece of shaft, and I'm going to take a piece of brass, maybe about, could be 7 or 8, and I'm just going to drill a hole in, a 5mm hole, and I'm going to silver solder that onto the end of the shaft. Then I'm going to mount it once it's all cool in the lathe. Just make sure that's perfectly lined, because you know these things move a bit sometimes. I'm going to drill my 3mm hole in here, which is going to take the motor shaft, and then put a couple of mounting screws into there. So once we've done that, I'm going to fit this onto the motor and the end cap, just test it all out, make sure it goes through. And right at the far end of this, I'm going to put the thread for the motor. The final thing I'm going to do, because I don't want to take the prop off every time I want to remove this, I'm actually going to do it a bit differently, because I'll probably use some Loctite on there. It's not going to be that easy to get off. So I'm actually going to, now that it's all beautifully lined up, running very easily, is just cut it and put a nice mounting block on here with some screws in it, several grub screws to keep it in place, and that's then how it's going to work. So if I want to take the prop out, I undo that, slide the prop out, take this off, slide the end cap off, take this, then it all comes apart, it's all lined up, and it'll all be fine. That's it. So here is the shape of the blade, and I've kept a tongue on the end of it so that I can work on it, and I've been ripping this down so that it's easy to grind, and that is the template piece, and as you can see that fits nicely in against my drawing, and I'm going to use that now to shape the remaining 7, which I've now done
And now this is the trickiest part, which is putting an aerofoil shape on the back side of each of these. This took a fair amount of time, and I must admit I did sand a little bit of skin off my fingers. So now that I've got that initial shape, the best approach is a dear old hand file. And you've seen me do this on other blades. Patience is the key here, especially on a blade as long as this. Using a smooth file here. No, I'm not using a bastard file here. That's the smooth one. You can hear the difference in the sound. So now just finishing it with a piece of sandpaper.